Hi, Dick Rauscher here. Today we're going to be filming inside the rig, the camper here, primarily because it's pretty cold outside and a little bit on the breezy side. So rather than fight the elements, we decided we'd come inside. Today we're going to be talking about Stony Hill number 273, 6 critical threats for human civilization and global stability. This is a pretty important article. I'm trying to tie together some primary thinking. We're going to break it into 2 sessions because there's a lot of material in this article. So today we're going to be filming part 1, and the next nugget that comes out will be part 2. It'll be just a continuation of this. Basically, what we're looking at here is the underlying nature of a problem. There's an old adage that says that if you don't understand the underlying nature or cause of the problem, then you're never going to be able to come up with a solution to the problem. Why? Because the underlying cause or nature of the problem hasn't been solved. It'll persist. The way I like to approach this problem of underlying cause and beginning to understand why we have the problems that we have and why the 6 critical threats are growing and becoming more and more serious day by day. I like to use primitive ego thinking, and the 4 aspects of primitive ego thinking that I'm going to be kind of focusing on in this particular article is, number 1, our never-ending need to be right. Okay, we have to be right. We get in an argument, we're always trying to prove the other person wrong and we're right. The other is kind of a greed-based, and we'll talk a lot about that in this article, in this video. What's in it for me? The primitive ego is very, very focused on what's in it for me. Third, primitive ego does not like change. Change, I think it's kind of wired into our DNA, represents threat, and we don't like to go there. How do we see this? Ask someone to change the way they think, or to change a belief, or change an opinion, or change an assumption, and you will immediately get an aggressive pushback. People, the primitive ego doesn't like change. It's bottom line. And the fourth item here is the primitive ego is very focused on now, on immediate gratification. The primitive ego has very little ability to think in terms of long-term or delayed gratification. So we're going to look at these 4 basic concepts of the thinking process that's systemic in our human culture. Almost every human being alive today is being controlled by the emotionally reactive primitive ego and its early childhood thinking process. And we're going to take a look at why this needs to be evolved. We need to tame this primitive ego. Otherwise, the problems that we're facing in our nation and around the world globally, they're not going away. So today, in part 1, we're going to take a look at the first 3 threats. And these are pretty serious threats. There's a lot of material in this particular nugget, and I really encourage you to read it. I think it's quite important that we begin to get an understanding of what the underlying nature of these problems is so that we can begin to come up with effective and creative solutions. Okay, number 1, unlimited economic expansion. Capitalism is based on that premise. You'll hear it 100 times a day on the news broadcasts, the talking heads on the financial news broadcasts. Everybody talks about unlimited economic expansion. One of the premises that I'm making in this article is that unlimited economic expansion is extremely dangerous for the future of our human species and for our planet. Why? Because it represents exponential growth. It's not sustainable. One of the ways I like to illustrate this concept is with the story of the king. And the king, in an ancient culture, rewarded occasionally some of his subjects if they did something that was helpful for the king's empire. So in this story, the king grants the wish to the commoner, and the commoner says, I would like 1 grain of wheat on the first square on your chessboard, and then I want 2 grains on the second, 4 grains on the third, 8 grains on the next one, and so forth. So in each square on the chessboard, the number of grains doubled. Well, the king kind of chuckled to himself and said, wow, I got a real dummy here. And he granted the wish. What he didn't realize is that commoner understood unlimited economic expansion is basically exponential growth. By the time they got to the 30th square on the chessboard, the amount of grain had grown to like a billion tons, okay? I've forgotten the exact number, but it was an enormous amount of grain, and obviously bankrupted the king and his empire. So that's the economic premise of capitalism. We cannot grow exponentially forever. It's not unlimited. There is a limit, and nature will provide that limit. What our goal needs to be is sustainability. But of course, the minute we change this economic understanding of capitalism, then what's in it for me? Well, most people, and certainly the 1%, are going to recognize that, wow, this is going to change the entire economic system globally. That's a massive threat to their wealth, okay? So they're not going to be particularly interested in it. Secondly, they don't like change anyway, and they're all focused on immediate gratification. In other words, what's the next way that they can get more money? So what they're going to do is they're not going to be the least bit interested in changing our economic system off of unlimited economic expansion. Bottom line, we're going to run out of resources. We're polluting our air. We're basically destroying our planet. This is our life support system. So primitive ego thinking is not going to allow change in our economic system. The second threat, obviously, is global warming and global climate intensification. Again, what we're looking at here is that the moment we accept global warming as a reliable science, the day that happens, then we're going to have to come off petroleum. Petroleum undergirds all of our economic systems. Our entire world runs on energy. So the minute we begin to go to a more renewable, sustainable energy source, what's going to happen is you're going to see massive change in our economy again. Same thing as with unlimited economic expansion. So when this happens, the 1% are not going to be interested in it. Now, unfortunately, we really don't have an option on this, okay? And this is why I'm holding these up as critical problems for us, because nature has built-in negative feedback systems. And her systems, which are always fighting to get our planet in balance, can get very, very intense. A lot of the storms we're seeing are negative feedback, where the planet is trying to balance all of this heat and move it around the planet. So we really aren't going to have a choice, whether the primitive ego of the 1%, or even for most of us today, we would really not want to see the changes that are going to come. They're going to be difficult. But we don't have a choice. We're either going to have chaos created by negative feedback from nature, or we're going to make a choice and try to find a creative way to move forward. Bottom line, if we continue to use primitive ego thinking up here, we're not going to tackle the problem. We're going to avoid the change. It's going to hit our greed, what's in it for us thinking. It represents change, and immediate gratification is immediately going to be replaced by long-term benefits and long-term thinking. Third basic problem, critical problem, our core values. We, as a culture, we talk about the fact that we're a compassionate nation. And what I'm holding up is that if we maintain our primitive ego thinking, our need to be right, what's in it for me today, now, and I don't want to change, of course, to get that. What happens is that if we're going to really live our values, at least our stated values, then we have to begin to think about mutual benefit and common good. What does that mean? Once again, we're back at a massive change in our economic system, globally, not just in our nation. So what happens is that the income and wealth inequality, for example, the 1% are not going to give that up. If we don't insist on change, then the people who are running the world today, the 1% and the multinationals, our politicians, they're not going to be interested in mutual benefit and common good. The problem, you can only push that so far, and the people in the middle class and poor, those living in poverty, they're not going to put up with it too much longer. We're seeing a lot of instability in the world today, and it's primarily because of inequality. Okay, we're not, as a species, we're not living our core values, and we need to begin doing that. So, all three of these items, these three first, the first three of the six critical challenges or threats to human civilization, all have to do with economic change. So in each case, the economic impact that we would have if we got off unlimited economic expansion, if we got off of petroleum, if we began to truly live out our core values, or at least our stated core values, they all imply massive economic change. Now, bottom line, in this first part one of the article, we don't really have a choice. We can argue about it, we can deny it, we can avoid it, we can pretend that it doesn't exist, but it does. And there isn't one of these three threats that we can ignore, not without having it impact the future of our species or human civilization for sure. I think it's really pretty important that we begin to break through this primitive ego thinking and begin to really look at what the issues are that are facing us and the underlying cause, which is primitive ego, childhood primitive ego thinking. It's very reactionary, it's very emotional, and it's not going to solve the problems that we need to solve. Okay, we'll see you down the road at part 2 on the next Stony Hill Nugget, and we'll wrap this up.